Yes, good morning. Thank you, Katie. My name is Rafael Aquino. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Affinity Management Services. We are an association management company. We service both Dade, Broward, and the Palm Beach area. Thank you so much for having me today. It's a privilege to be around such an excellent panel.
Thank you so much. Erin Nickerson.
My name is Erin Nickerson with Super Restoration, soon to be First On Site. I am your regional account director for the Tri-County, specializing in condo and HOA. We are a full service restoration company, taking you from your date of loss, whether that be water, fire, mold, COVID cleanings, to a pre-loss condition, all the way through general construction. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm so excited to do this class with you again.
Thank you. Matt Reedy.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I'm Matt Reedy with Plastridge. If you don't know Plastridge, the longest standing privately held agency in South Florida. Just celebrated our 102 year anniversary, founded in Delray Beach, 4 offices, primarily working in the Tri-County area.
Awesome. Thank you. And I think Plastridge's been around for more than 100 years, right, Matt?
102.
There you go. Jane Bracken.
Hello, my name is Jane Bracken. I'm the Palm Beach Commercial Relationship Manager for Popular Association Bank, one of the first banks to offer specialized services to associations as early as the early 1990s, both deposits, loans, and FDIC insurance. So again, thank you, as everyone has said, honored to be on this panel and delighted that everyone has joined us.
Thank you, Jane. And Paula Mera, who's sitting next to me.
Thanks. Thank you, everyone, for attending. I always appreciate when our board members, our managers are willing to take their time and learn extra information. This is going to be a great course because it's updated information with respect to COVID. So hopefully we can share some tips for our associations to move us forward through, again, this unprecedented time. And our associations across the board have been dealing with this, our volunteer board members. So we applaud you for that. I'm Paula Mera. I've practiced for 18 years in Florida, dealing primarily with condominium associations, country clubs, and homeowners associations. Also, don't forget our little co-ops out there as well. My colleague, Steve Brighton, has practiced for 26 years, and we have a new addition of about 8 months ago, Michael Casanova, who's practiced for over 11 years. So we like to let people know we are a smaller group of practice attorneys, but we do have a deep bench of experience. So with that, we'll get started, Katie.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you for being here. This is not actually a formal class, but rather a discussion. And so we have prepared some questions that are real hot topic questions, seem to come up at a lot of our webinars for our panel today. You do have somewhere located on your screen a box that says Q&A. So feel free to chat your questions in at any time throughout there, and we will try to either answer them live or type you back an answer. Your regular chat has been disabled for this because we are doing it as a webinar panel, and that way everything's through the Q&A. So thank you again for joining us, and I'm going to go ahead and get started. So we have a couple of really good questions to start off. One of them is starting with Paula. Paula, are emergency powers still available to board members and management since the state of emergency is still active?
Yes. So when we get the call from our clients, that usually comes in the form of this. We have very upset residents because we have continued to close the pool or limit the pool or other recreational areas. And the question then is answered by, yes, the board still has emergency powers, but keep in mind, they're not, the advice we're going to give with respect to those emergency powers are not the same as last March or April, where everything was closed and then we had to move towards full closure. Our approach now is, yes, you can still maintain the closure of the rec facilities, depending on what they are. We're going to give different answers if it's a closed country club card room versus your pool. Also, keep in mind, you don't have all the restrictions with respect to the government orders, the governor's orders with respect to wiping and swiping and pool deck equipment, et cetera. But ultimately and generally, yes, you still do have those emergency powers. I think the takeaway point is approach that with a common sense approach with respect to closing certain areas versus keeping certain areas open or limiting the capacity or size of the people that can be in those areas.
Okay, super. So they don't have to worry if they have a small gym and they want to, keep that closed but open the pool for the residents? Because, there is some safety concerns when you've got a real small area like that.
Right. Again, compared to a card room versus your pool, you're going to approach those separately, differently.
Perfect, thank you. Raphael, what are most of your associations doing with their offices, clubhouses, amenities? Are they open, limited usage? How's it going over there?
Sure. So it really depends on the board of directors that we're dealing with, and their how they measure risk. Overall, what we're seeing is that we have seen the regulations loosen up a little bit in most of the associations. It's all dependent, as you stated earlier, Katie, with regards to the size of the areas that they have, the common areas. So if there's small card rooms, then we're definitely keeping those areas or making the recommendation to keep those areas closed. Now, as we get closer to the summer, where the residents that live here are going to start using the pools, and now we didn't get as many snowbirds as we would normally get this time around, but we are seeing the pool area start to open up. Before, it was a point where there weren't any chairs, really dependent on what county you were in. But now they've moved the chairs back out, marked with the 6 feet, anywhere between 2 to 4 chairs, and making sure that they have the proper distance. We're using technology to help, assist in the reservation of those areas. So if the association has a website, they can reserve those areas via website with the 2-hour limit, or again, depending on the board, some have longer timeframes that they permit. But again, it really depends on the association. Overall, what we are seeing is boards are starting to loosen up their regulations, and many residents have been cooped up for a very long time, especially in the condo side. So we have to give them some kind of freedom. But again, it needs to be balanced. In no way am I saying to just loosen up all your restrictions. It just needs to be something that's measured, and where you're, consulting with your attorney to make sure that whatever you're doing, that you have the proper guidance and proper documentation. So should something occur, that at least you made the right business judgment rule for your association.
And how are you guys dealing with residents who ignore those restrictions?
Like everything else, right? It's a challenge. And again, I hate to give you an attorney response, but it depends on the board of directors.
Well, I know, Polly, you want to explain how you would quickly deal with that?
Yeah.
Well, and unfortunately, we have so many examples, ranging from a basic pool violation that they've brought, guests to the pool versus just the resident. That's a popular restriction we see. All the way compared to where, unfortunately, my advice is you need to call law enforcement. So it's going to depend on the issue, but definitely reach out to your legal counsel. Again, you are volunteer board members. Reach out to your property manager and seek whatever you can with respect to a remedy. Fines, suspensions, those always can be employed as well. Oftentimes, it may be a one-time dramatic event for our board members who are facing someone who is not listening or following the rules. And then sometimes our advice is, okay, if they do it again, then we're going to approach it differently from a legal aspect.
Yeah.
Thank you both. Yeah. And so that leads me to Aaron. When we are opening all of these amenities and we've got the clubhouse open and the pools open and everything else, what do you recommend for cleaning, for making sure everything's sanitized and cleaned?
Absolutely. So I think we need to start at the beginning, and as an association, you are a business, so you are required to have proper signage around the areas with your regulations saying that you do need to be wearing a mask if we're in an interior space. If you are opening up your gyms or your rec rooms in an interior basis, I do recommend that you do have those slotted times, and we should be adhering to the social distancing rules that are through the EPA and the government and the county urine regulations. First and foremost, we do recommend cleaning and sanitizing all indoor spaces that are used on a regular basis, and having your internal teams using EPA approved products and FDA approved products that will kill the COVID-19 virus. We do recommend that if you are putting out pool furniture, that you do have a regular cleaning schedule for your staff to go through that, whether it's once a day, twice a day. I would say base that off of the frequency of the people that are using your facilities. And that's something that you will have to monitor as an association and do pay attention to. As far as a cleaning protocol, if somebody does call you, I think we might get to that a little bit later in the conversation, but there are steps that you do need to take as an association when somebody does get sick on your property to cover the association as well. And there are outside services for that, so you don't absorb that risk as an association.
Perfect. And do you recommend, Aaron, that they leave their pool furniture still inside, or is it okay to use it, or, what do you think?
I would base that off of the risk that you want to absorb as an association. If you are a 55 and older community and you have a higher risk for potentially people getting sick from the virus, that may be something that you want to consider not putting out and requiring people to bring their own furniture to the pool. But again, that's a decision at the board of directors. How much risk and liability do you want to assume as an association?
Right. If I can add here, Katie, one important part that Aaron brought up that I didn't mention, which is it's very important if you have that personnel or not. Our associations where they don't have that personnel, they're still pretty strict because they just don't have the ability or the financial wherewithal to be able to clean the machines either after use or do a very thorough cleaning before the opening and the closing of it. So that's an important piece that I didn't bring up, but yeah, that's a great point that Aaron mentions. If you don't have the staff, it becomes a little bit more challenging for you to loosen up your restrictions.
Absolutely. I
Appreciate
think
it.
that last year really taught us is that we didn't know we had to budget for these things. So if you don't have the resources to be able to make a good decision when it comes to the process of cleaning, then it's something that we want to think about not doing and not opening up those amenities because we can't provide that service for them in a healthy manner.
I agree 100%. We do have a couple questions coming in about this same topic. One of them is, I'm on an HOA board. We are contemplating reopening our gym and increasing the number of people at the pool, currently 16, including swimmers. It's pretty specific. We have monitors who check to make sure that people are properly signed in. We also are contemplating adding outdoor gym classes. Can we add chairs to the pool area? How about making these decisions? So can they put the things back quickly for Paula?
I think, again, you're going to address each of those specific recreational facilities on a case-by-case basis, depending upon all the different factors that you will use as a board. I do think that when you are making these decisions, you should schedule a board meeting and have an open board meeting with respect to these decisions. You don't want to be making these decisions behind the scenes, so to speak, on a survey type basis between your board members. So that's the first takeaway point, is make sure you have and are making these decisions at open and properly noticed board meetings. And then the best advice I can give you is really not legal advice, because we don't have any governors or county orders at this time that are specifically restricting what should occur, like we did in, again, March and April of last year. So you're going to look at those situations and you're going to use, your common sense best approach and business judgment. What is in the best interest of the association? That's where you're going to start from, and you're going to then narrow those decisions down to whether it makes sense. I think it also makes sense when you're on an HOA or condo board. What is the community demanding? So there's a political, I'll call it political aspect to this as well. What is what are the owners demanding? And we can get into those risk assumption agreements that were popular last year as well. If somebody wants to use the closed gem, that is something we recommend. Whether or not those will play out in court in favor of association, nobody can tell you that at this point in time.
Great, thanks, Paula. And given that we are over budget with these extra costs and trying to figure out how to work our way through this new normal, this brings me to banking. And Jane, how can boards of directors and management companies and managers streamline their banking so that they can, avoid going to the bank or, do the things digitally remotely? What do you guys think?
Well, we certainly recommend as a bank that you automate as much of your processes, financial processes, as possible. Of course, management companies working with associations are pretty well automated already. Individual associations, self-managed associations really need to think about getting on board with that. But let's back up a second and let's talk about finding the right bank first, because not every bank is created equal in the association world. So you want to find a bank that knows and understands associations, has a specialized division within its bank that supports associations with a team of customer service, and most importantly, a relationship manager who you have a direct relationship with, that you can go to answer any questions. And you want to make sure that that particular association bank is fully automated, offers you the automated AR, that you seek out automated AP, You want to make sure the bank has a history of being in the business for a long time and successfully works with clients, has a good reputation, is sizable so that it's devoting enough resources to technology to support and to keep everything secure. Of course, today in the fraudulent world that we have, security and access control is so important. So we want to make sure that the association bank that you have a relationship with offers not only the full array of services from accounts to loans to FDIC protection, but also protects your accounts in a huge way.
Great, thank you so much. Matt, this one's for you. Are any of the insurance increases being caused from COVID and the new world?
Good question. And I guess if you've been on your board involved in the community over the last 2 years, you've noticed steep increases year over year, where some associations, spoke with a client yesterday, looking at a net 45% increase over 2 years. And so trying to make sense of the chaos, I can at least say from a COVID perspective, it hasn't been the major direct influence on why rates are going up. One of the biggest coverages that's been discussed because of COVID is loss of business income, which doesn't apply as much for an association, but for the businesses that have been closed down or lost business because of how people are now acting in this new world. One of the big things was, well, would loss of business income kick in? And domestically, I can say most of these policies contain wordings that require there to be direct physical loss. So there has to be something that directly physically damages the entity before that coverage would kick in. So tornado rips the roof off, you can't operate your restaurant. Very clear indicator there. But what I've learned is overseas, particularly in Europe, they don't have the exact same wording. So we're seeing it come through the courts that this loss of business income is being paid overseas. And so how does that directly affect us in South Florida? This is more so theory and the fallout, because there's certainly, and I'll get into this in a second, there's certainly enough that we've seen domestically and in South Florida that's attributing to a lot of these increases we're seeing. But you look at that and the cost of reinsurance going up, because we are all connected at a certain level globally there. Now, honing it in on the more of the micro level, South Florida in particular is the worst area in the country for bodily injury type lawsuits. So I'll use one of our larger partner carriers. They work across the whole country, and about 28% of their premium comes from Palm Beach, Broward, Miami-Dade, but a little over 34% of their total claims come from the same 3 counties. So if you look at it on a global or on a national scale, a 6% disparity versus premium and taking in and claims going out, that's a pretty big jump and measurable. So it's why you see in that instance the liability rates going up the way they are. With property, there's a number of different things going into it. One is back in September was the 3-year deadline to file claims from Irma. So there were a lot of attorneys, there were a lot of adjusters out there, public adjusters, who were running around trying to get people to sign up for last minute claims. And now the companies are having to adjust a larger number of catastrophic claims at one time than normally they would. Well, they're still catching up. Now you have the wildfires out west. You've had a number of tornadoes and other types of catastrophic events throughout the country in 2020. I mean, 2020 set some pretty sadistic records, even in the insurance world, not just globally and all kinds of aspects of our life, but it's been a bad couple of years. And 2019, I'll end with this, 2019, the Florida property market operated on about 111% loss ratio. And that's not just commercial with condominiums, but that also includes the residential market, where the Florida property market paid out 11% more in claims than it brought in premiums. And the Office of Insurance Regulations requires the companies to increase rates so that they can stay in business without going under, like we saw a lot of companies do after 2004.
So Matt, we do have somebody asking, that got hit with a pretty hefty increase in December. Would you think that they're going to go up again this year?
It's a tough question to answer. I really hope not. I'm hoping.
I think we all hope not.
Yeah, I really missed the meetings when I walked in. I said, everything's going down by 15%, and I didn't have to look over my shoulder when I left the room. my joke has been on Zoom, on these Zoom meetings, nobody can try to throw things at me. But with the way the rates are jumping up so dramatically, you look at over 5-6 years, the rates went down 10%, 10%, 10%, 10%. Now they're going up significantly, 45% or more over 2 years. And it depends on the association, depends on your claims, depends on which insurance companies you've been with. Some have been a lot more stable year to year on renewals than others, where some companies chase the absolute lows, where you were getting rates that we didn't even think were possible until they gave us the renewal quote. And now they're overcorrecting to overcharge for the shortfall that they had. I'm at least optimistic that we'll see it start to level off. I don't think that we'll be back to flat renewals by the time we get to next year, but I'm certainly optimistic that we'll see, after a dramatic overcorrection from the market, that we'll see a little optimistic now. It's still very early this year to start looking at what we're going to look at in 2020.
Right.
That is something that we'll be monitoring as we start to get into budget season in the fall.
Thank you very much. This is more to sort of the operations side. Now, Paula, if there is a known resident or staff member that has the virus, what's the best, advice that you can give to the owners in the building or property? Should they notify the owners? Should they, get the staff tested? What's your advice on that?
You certainly want to make sure that you maintain, if an owner has come to staff or a board member, you do not want to share the specific owner's name with others. Even if, in my opinion, the owner has said, I don't mind if you do, that would require then, if you wanted to, I would highly recommend having that in writing, prepared by an attorney, that the owner has indicated that they are okay sharing their health information that they shared with a board member or a staff member. What we do generally when we are at that question, we do have a standardized letter that can go to the owners. And again, keep in context that we may be talking about a high-rise condominium where we are sharing a lobby and sharing elevators versus your homeowners association where individual people may not come into contact with each other at all. So in either situation, again, the early days, May and April, this was a frequent letter to the owners or email blast to the owners that would go out indicating that a member of the association or a tenant or guest has indicated that they have tested positive for the virus. So just a general information to the association would be kind of the threshold on what we would respond with. And then we did have a situation where we understood that the person was using the gym quite frequently and had used it that day when the test results came back. So in that situation, you're going to treat that a little bit differently. My recommendation would be, if you have a specific example like that, you're going to be closing the gym. You're definitely going to go in and contact Aaron for a cleaning of that gym, an adequate cleaning of the gym, to make sure that as a board member, you've shown that you've done all of the appropriate steps when you have a specific example like that.
Great, thank you. Raphael, when you have, staff that has exposures, on-site staff, I know Affinity does a lot of on-site associations. How do you handle that with your staff?
In the reference to if they've gotten a COVID?
Yes.
So we've had that unfortunate circumstance, and fortunately they're okay. But in those situations, as Paula said, we're going to communicate to the residents, send an e-blast that a team member on the team has contracted the COVID virus. And then we'll also contact the restoration company or Super Restoration to come in and do a deep cleaning of the office. And in this particular building, that's what we needed to do. The person had multiple contact throughout the property. It becomes a bit challenging because it depends, we have to make a quick shift because in this case, it was actually a manager, and the manager had contact with the entire team. So it was very challenging in the sense that we had to get everyone tested. So we had to have everyone leave the building. We had to bring in shift personnel from other properties to be able to make that coverage. That property had about 18 members. Fortunately enough, no one else tested positive. But we had to get all the areas cleaned that manager had touched for the past couple of days, because managers are not just sitting in a desk; they're walking around the property and so forth. So we've had that situation occur, but fortunately enough, no one has been sick enough to get hurt in any sense.
Great, thank you. And Erin, if there is a known outbreak, what are the extra protocols that you're recommending beyond the regular preventative?
So there's 3 different types of cleanings that we want to talk about when it comes to the COVID-19 virus. There's proactive cleaning, which you and your team should be doing every single day on property, wiping down high touch point areas, your elevator buttons, door handles. If you have lobbies, anything that a resident would be touching on a very regular basis, those are the things we want to be cleaning as an internal team. Then we talk about a reactive measure when you have somebody that tests positive for the virus. That is when you want to call in a licensed professional that has a history of doing cleanings. And this cleaning is not new. This is going back to H1N1, SARS. We've been doing these types of cleanings for years. So you want to be working with a company who has that experience, because it's all about the liability when it comes to somebody testing positive. We want to make sure that we take the liability off of the association and put it onto our contractor that's going to do the cleaning. That way, if a resident comes back and says, hey, I got sick from being in your building on your property, your attorney now has the ammunition to say, hey, we did our proactive cleaning, we did our reactive cleaning, this is the company that did the cleaning, and was our proactive measures. So it's really about liability again in that situation. And then the third type of cleaning we want to talk about is the prolonged cleaning. After somebody tests positive, there's a couple products that are out on the market, particularly one that we offer is called Armor, and it guarantees you 12-month protection from the COVID-19 virus. We do a reactive cleaning. So we do a fogging and a wipe down of all high touch surface areas with our cleaning products. And then we apply the product called Armor, and the COVID-19 virus cannot live on a hard surface for 12 months after that product is applied. It takes about 4 hours to dry. So that means that nobody can go in your elevator for 4 hours. You have to clear out your lobby for 4 hours, but it does guarantee you that protection moving forward, so that if you do have another positive case, you don't need to go through the whole decontamination process again, because the virus was not contracted on your property.
And we had a good question that came in earlier. Do you think that it's safe to let the owners clean the pool furniture, to trust them that, or do you think
any sort of proactive cleaning with products that are certified to kill the virus is great proactive measure? So again, if that's something that you and your community want to absorb that risk, I think it's a great idea, if you're going to have your common elements open, to have the products there to say, hey, help us in this process, help keep the community safe. I really believe this is a community effort, and we all need to work together in order to get this done correctly. So the more proactive you can be with hand sanitizers around the property, with cleaning products around the property, the better.
Great, thank you so much. Matt, do you think that the insurance carrier should be placed on notice if there is an exposure to owners or staff?
At this point, most liability carriers are going to have the communicable disease exclusion already in them. When
They got that done quickly.
when all of this kicked off, most companies had it. And those that did not have it, especially if they're excess surplus lines where they don't have to jump through some of the hoops with the state for new form filings, they started throwing those exclusions in there as soon as they got to renewal. So now that we're effectively through a full year of renewals, it'd be expected that most of these policies are going to have that exclusion in there. If it's the claim of I got sick on your premises, that would be covered by your general, not covered by your general liability. The exclusion on your general liability would answer that question. I've had certain claims where I've had certain instances where there's fear from the board that there may be suits against the board for how they handled the protocol, not necessarily compensate me for my sickness, but so those times can sometimes come in through the DNO, but that's more of a case by case. I haven't seen a lot of it, or even had to have a lot of theoretical conversations regarding that. So that's really more of a conversation once we get to that point between me and the client, or bring the attorney in as well and see what we want to do. But
Okay, great. Thanks, Matt. Appreciate that. Jane, what specific products and services are available from banks to assist with PPE and the other COVID-related items that the associations needed that were not necessarily budgeted for?
And that's a great question, because of course, experience over the last year taught us that, there were unbudgeted expenses. Who predicted that the virus was going to attack. So, there were expenditures not only in cleaning supplies and signage and personnel and deep cleanings. And hopefully this year, you've addressed those and you've included some additional line item expenses in your budget, so you're a little bit better prepared. But we always recommend that associations seek out what we call a revolving line of credit. Some refer to it as an emergency line of credit. And we used that last year as for all types of emergencies. Obviously in the past, especially after Hurricane Wilma, emergency lines of credit have been used for hurricane preparations, but it can be used for pandemics. It can be used for fires. I mean, there are a number of emergencies that associations face where cash shortage occurs and you need to rely on something to bolster you up for the remainder of the year for a short period of time until you get a special assessment in place. But so we recommend revolving lines of credit. Again, not every bank is created equal. So association banks, from bank to bank, some offer revolving lines of credit, some do not. We do at Popular Association Bank offer that revolving line of credit. And it's a low interest environment. Now is really a good time. We kind of see that interest rates are likely to go up in the near future. So if you don't have that emergency line of credit or revolving line of credit in place, it's something that you should seek. But the other thing I recommend is associations should have bank credit cards. For purchases online, for purchases of supplies, etc. Credit cards, debit cards are, Florida statute has written that associations should not use debit cards. But certainly credit cards, the association bank can issue to specific users with specific maximum amounts, and they're more easily controlled. And then of course, when that staff member leaves, you can eliminate that person. So there's control over those credit cards, but they're another way to address some of the PPE and COVID related expenses.
Great, thanks, Jane. Paula, are you seeing any increase in collections activity that is caused from the pandemic?
We anticipated that we would, but actually we have not seen any increase, at least for our collection clients. And I haven't spoken to anyone else that practices in this area that has seen any increase. So we have not seen an increase in the collection activity. The problem that we are experiencing for our clients is the bank foreclosures. The judges are canceling the sales and resetting them, canceling them again 2 or 3 times, and not putting, because there is a moratorium on the federally backed mortgage loans. And also, even when we don't have that federally backed mortgage loan, and the other part of that is if it's owner occupied, even if it's not owner occupied. We've had a lot of experiences with judges canceling the sale anyway. So that is the main issue. We are, of course, inferior to that first mortgagee, and we are waiting to foreclose the association's claim of lien because there is a status of bank foreclosure that is judgment or near judgment or has been set for sale. So we're in a holding pattern with respect to those particular cases. My advice on those particular cases, and it just occurred today for one of our clients, is we set motion for status conference hearings, even in the bank foreclosure sales that we know are a federally backed or a VA loan, get it in front of the judge and make sure we keep pushing those along. And at the same time, that often will awaken your sleepy homeowner who is refusing to pay his or her assessments. So on the bank foreclosure side, stay aggressive, do what you need to do to keep those motion for status conference hearings going. And on the foreclosure side, if you have a foreclosure filed, also keep moving forward through that, because that is the most effective way for an owner to actually enter into a payment plan and start curing that delinquency.
Awesome. Yeah, we need the money coming in so that we can pay for all the projects, which brings me to my next topic, which is projects at properties such as concrete restoration, other repairs. Raphael, how are you guys handling that when contractors need to gain access to units?
Sure. If you don't mind, I'm going to address a little bit about what Paula mentioned, because I do like to give an opinion on that. With regards to collections, we've seen a small increase, but again, I'm of the opinion, and what I've been advising our boards is I do believe that we're in somewhat of a shadow market just because of the moratorium that we have going on at the moment. I think once the moratorium gets finally lifted, is where we're going to see what the real colors are going to be with regards to collections if owners are now having either to catch up or do whatever they need to do. So as Paula stated, it's very important that you're staying aggressive and you're notifying your residents of where they are and potentially moving those accounts over. At the end of the day, it is a nonprofit organization. So if there's no cash coming in, it becomes very difficult to handle projects as you had asked me. When it comes to projects and the coordination of those, again, it's just following protocols of the contractors. Number one, making sure that everyone is wearing a mask. So if you haven't negotiated your contracts yet, you want to make sure that you're working with the attorney to put certain provisions within the agreement that everyone is going to be wearing a face mask at all times, and start negotiating that in your contract, because this is going to be like this for some time. This is not going away anytime soon. So that's an important tip to put into place. If you've already have your contract in place, just dealing with whoever your contractor is and making sure that everyone's wearing their masks. If they need to go into a particular unit, this is where it becomes a little bit more challenging, because depending on the risk factor of that resident and that board of directors of how they want to handle it. In some cases, we've seen it where it's become very strict that they're only going to allow one person in or a maximum of 2 people. In some cases, they're even having to, since they already have the scaffolds up front or they're swinging from the building, they need to come in from the balcony. So again, it really depends on the boards and how they want to handle it. Overall, we want to be very cautious because we are walking into residents' homes. So we're going to limit the amount of people. A lot of times when you're doing restoration work, you would find, the engineer, the photographer that's taking the pictures, 3 concrete workers. Now we're seeing that limited to maybe just the engineer and whoever's going to do the work to come in, so that there's a less amount of individuals walking into that residence unit.
Great, thank you. And Aaron, same thing for when you have to go into units for water intrusion, leaks, those kind of things, same scenario?
Absolutely. First and foremost, whenever anybody is walking into your building, it is required, especially in Palm Beach County, for you to be wearing a mask right now, and in Broward and in Dade. So that should be a non-negotiable when anybody's coming onto your property. Taking safety precautions and vetting your vendors is exceptionally important. Like Raphael said, having that as a provision in your contract is great. Also making sure your contractors are signing in and out, just in case one of them does call you and say, hey, I was on your property last Tuesday from 9 to 2 and my guy tested positive. At least that way you have a time frame now of who they may have come into contact with, so you can make a better decision as a board. So making sure you know who's signing in and out is really important. As far as if I've gotten any pushback on fixing water leaks, floods, fire, mold, all those issues, we did put our mold jobs on hold as of March 1st of last year, and we started resuming probably 6 to 8 months after, because mold technically is a non-emergency situation. But as far as emergency situations goes, because COVID is an emergency, you have an active COVID case, we do have, as an association, as you are an association, you have the right to enter anybody's unit for a flood or a fire at any time. That is an emergency that could potentially affect the structural integrity of your building. So you do have the right to access. We have seen buildings limiting our teams to 1 and 2 people if they do need to service a flood inside of a unit. When we enter a unit, minimum, what we are wearing is Tyvek suits. We're wearing masks, gloves, booties. So we're making sure we're taking our safety precautions to protect your residents. So that is definitely something that you want to be able to offer your vendors as well, or require them to have booties when they walk into units. That's probably one of the bigger things that I see tracking things in and out of units. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Matt, are you seeing any increase in claims for COVID related issues? Are you actually getting claims filed for these issues?
So I'll start with, I've been very fortunate in the 100 or so associations that I personally manage. I have filed 0 claims regarding COVID. Now, we've already talked about how, at least for general liability, a lot of those policies already had that exclusion in there. So that kind of cut it off. One thing I've talked about with Paula pretty much every time we've done one of these webinars, we talk about causation. And early on when people weren't doing a lot, if somebody got sick, they could usually track down, like, I've been to my gym and I've been in my home, and everything else got delivered to me by Publix or Uber Eats or whatever you order through. But as people are moving more and more into, figuring out how to operate in this world now, I think there's a lot more places that people are going to be exposed to, which makes it a more difficult case to make that I got it specifically because I lifted weights in the gym of my condominium association. So for my opinion there would be, I think that there's becoming less and less, unless the board's just completely pretending that this doesn't even exist still, and they're making silly decisions. If you're doing what you should be doing, I think it's going to be a difficult case to certainly put the liability and bodily injury if the exclusion isn't there on the policy. So short answer is no. I've seen, at least felt less of a threat than we did about 9-10 months ago on this.
Good to hear. Good to hear. And speaking of doing everything remotely and digitally, back to Jane. We did have a question, Jane, that came in. Condominiums aren't allowed to have the debit cards. So credit cards, do you still have to have a social security number backing up the credit card for the bank?
The association banks, again, that's important to find the right bank. Association banks will use the association as collateral. So you aren't personally guaranteeing. So no social security numbers will not be needed. Again, you need to find the right bank who offers the right credit card.
Awesome. And what other banking services do you have to streamline stuff in our new normal?
Well, I talked initially about automating as much as you can possibly from your office and not having to go to the branch. Some branches aren't open, some you're using only the drive-through window. But when you use a specialized bank that offers association services, that support team will offer you an array of products and services. So you want to automate your accounts receivable. You want to give your owners options to make payments so that they don't come to the office to infect your staff. Certainly no cash transaction. We highly recommend that. I know CPAs and attorneys do as well. But there are a number of payment options that owners have available to them electronically. ACH, bill pay. They can still pay with a coupon in many cases, but you're automating all of your accounts receivable so that, and most management companies offer that as a part of their services. Self-managed associations, if they're not doing it, they certainly should seek to do that. And then you have lockbox and web-based solutions that give you an automated payment file so that all the owners can see their payment activity on the internet. They can look up their account activity. And it can be integrated into the software that you're using. It'd be a QuickBooks, TopSync, or whatever you might be using for staff efficiencies to create your financials. And then online banking services become so popular. So you use online banking services to check your balances and transfer and download statements. There really is no need to go to a bank. If you have any questions or have any issues, you pick up a phone, you make a phone call, you talk to someone who, you research a situation that way, either on the internet, online, through your computer, or you make a call and you get what information you need. But of course, security controls is important. As I said before, access control to certain functions limited to staff and board members, who have the authority to have the information is important to offer. Same day processing and reporting, you want to make sure that you're looking for those kinds of services. And positive pay is important. Today, fraud protection is so important online. So positive pay is one of those tools that helps protect and offers that fraud protection. And then we have remote deposit services available. So if you take those odd payments for whatever reason, you can still transact those through an on-site remote deposit imaged service so that, again, you are not having to go out, send your staff out, your volunteers out, or transact business outside of the office.
Awesome. Everything's moving digitally, moving in that.
It is.
Raphael, are any of your associations having to, or have they had the vaccine administered on property?
At our associations, no. There was one that tried to, and after having some discussions with their legal counsel, they decided not to take that route.
Well, okay, Paula, what do you think about that? Are there any liability concerns for having vaccines administered on site?
We have a couple associations that have actually offered that to their owners, and it went smoothly. The association staff or the managers, of course, are not administering the vaccine.
Definitely not.
Raphael is not putting a shot in your arm. If you were, I would send my mom down to you today. So it
Me
has,
too.
right, it has been wonderful for many of our associations. I know of 3 only that have provided this. And of course, they're in the 55 and older community. Outside of premises liability, my opinion is I don't see any particular issues with providing a vaccine site. And that's what you're providing. You're providing a location. You'll want to make sure, of course, there's always risk and liability in anything you do. And so it is a measure of that risk, whether the board wants to measure that risk and determine whether there's benefits overall to your community in anything you do. And so for the vaccine, as the association is providing a site, we'll want to make sure that we are social distancing, that we have organized it correctly, and that we're relying upon the individuals giving the vaccine to do the right thing as well. So honestly, in my opinion, I don't see any problems with providing the places, the location for the vaccines to be administered by another, outside of your normal premises liability type of risk factors that come into question when you're operating your association just generally.
Yeah, and so Matt, do they need any extra insurance to be a vaccine distribution site? What's your guidance on that insurance perspective?
When I've had to think through this, the premises liability, to Paula's point, is the big one. And just because it's happening on our site, what you'd be afraid of is somebody where the vaccine goes wrong, and because they got the shot in your clubhouse, somehow that makes you liable. Now, if who's administering the vaccine would be able to name you as additional insured on their policy for this. And yeah, I think it's kind of silly that we have to go through these steps, but I see claims all the time. Maybe this is why I'm more pessimistic about it. And I get suits all the time where somebody, I got a claim payout 15 grand because somebody admitted in their own admission, fell over tying their shoe when they had their foot up on a chair, fractured their hip, and sued the association. And then all because it happened outside the clubhouse. Other than that, there's no reason that we should have been involved in this anyway. So I could certainly see where it could go wrong now none of my clients have been anywhere close to getting the vaccine, so they haven't even gotten this part of the stage of the process. So if they could name us additional insured, I'd be pretty comfortable with it at that point, but it's kind of my 2 cents.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. All right, well, that's a lot on our operations side. Let's get into meetings. This is a hot topic for everybody. We have a couple questions in the feed on that. Paula, we'll start with you. Hot topic. What is the best advice you can offer on holding annual meetings by Zoom, digital platforms, and what do you think about that?
Right. So my best advice to my clients, because Katie is our educational director here at the firm, and she's actually non-billable. So I typically, when I get that question, I say, I'm going to call you. That's my best advice. No, but again, seriously, attendees via Zoom, the best advice is don't withhold keeping your annual meetings now pushed off. You're going to make sure that you schedule those as timely as you possibly can. Raphael can speak to this as well. The Zoom meeting platform, we are under a state of emergency. We get this question most often. Is it a proper meeting to hold it via Zoom? And our answer is yes, it is. And that is because we still are under a state of emergency, and it is the safest platform for meetings. Moving forward, one of our recommendations is to amend your bylaws to actually provide going forward in the future, hopefully 2023, 2024, we can have in-person meetings, but I think the platform for Zoom has been really effective to create a platform that other people can, people who didn't participate before for our associations are now participating. And I think that's a healthy association versus I still have clients that are just meeting by the pool and avoiding Zoom because they don't want their members participating as much. So try not to be that association, because we do want a healthy association where people are participating. So Zoom is proper. And I want to touch upon that question, can you account attendees via Zoom? I will say, I think the division has been pretty silent through this crisis, offering advice, or at least offering some advisory opinions that could have been offered in March or April of last year. But I did receive an email from the division indicating that, yes, you can count Zoom for a quorum. One of the most important aspects for Zoom is the ability to keep it organized and you know who is on your Zoom call so that when you do come across counting a quorum or taking other votes, you have the ability to do that. Add to that at all?
I did, yeah, I did want to add to that because I'm getting some comments too in the question chat
Mhm.
section. People do and can have in-person meetings, but obviously you still have to continue with the social distancing. We had an annual meeting last month where they had only set up 27 chairs. Their clubhouse used to normally hold 100 people easily. So, you know, they were all distanced apart, but they went through all of that and had maintenance come. And Raphael, you know, I'm going to lean on you a little bit too, you know, what you're seeing, because they had 4 people show up
Yeah.
for the big room that they prepared and had cleaned and did all this stuff, and 4 people showed up.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen more participation in Zoom than we would ever see in person, even with the larger HOA. So I was hopeful that maybe some legislation would pass this year. I haven't seen anything. The only legislation that I'm hoping that's going to come this year, it's been years that they've been trying to do this, is change the way HOAs elections are done to mirror those of condos. And the reason why I bring that, I'm praying, I'm still my fingers crossed, right?
Me
The
too.
reason why I really would like that to occur is because we're going to be in this situation for much longer, for some time. No one knows when, but for some time. And the most challenging elections or annual meeting process to handle on Zoom is HOAs. And the reason being is because, you know, there's certain rules depending on your documents of, okay, the votes need to be taken from the floor or they need to be write-in ballots. It's not as specific as with the condos that we've been able to slightly manage hosting an election. But with regards to meetings, I'm hopeful that it stays this way because these platforms do cater to those owners that are, number one, they don't live on the property. Number two, it's much quicker to be able to tell your wife, I'm going to jump in the room real quick for an hour meeting and I'll be right back and just come out of the room. So we've seen a higher attendance. The communication is also much, it's clear because we don't have the bickering that you'll get in a room where you have someone doing outbursts. We try to manage where possible in a webinar format, very similar to what we're doing right here. 3 to 7 board members. And then we'll give the residents the opportunity to chat by going in and giving them the opportunity to get their 3 minutes or having them present their questions. So it's been much more efficient, much more effective, and we've had a higher participation rate doing it on this format. I'm very hopeful that there eventually will be some legislation that will clear up the way we can and can't do it.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I did have somebody ask about how to deal with the owners who are not tech savvy. Zoom does allow for dial-in. My advice to you, and I'm sure Paula would say the same, is definitely just make sure you have the phone numbers that they can use and the meeting ID, meeting notices, so that they can call in if they don't know how to use the computer, don't use the computer, whatever. I mean, but I have seen, you know, a lot of our age-restricted communities are using Zoom and having no issues.
Yeah.
So even if there is a lot of call-ins.
Correct.
Right.
And
I think
it's
it's
much more,
important.
and it's even much more cost effective. I mean, I know Paula mentioned billable hours, so I get the opportunity to bring this up. It's also much more effective if you have to have your attorney, you know, at a meeting. You're not getting charged travel time. It's for everybody, for vendors. It's much easier even on culturally for our managers, because now our managers can go home, have a normal dinner, and then 7 o'clock log into a Zoom call rather than being at the property and then having to be away from the family. And those little small things, at least we value them, right? Because they're our team members. So our board members should value it as well, because it's a quality of life for the manager. They're going to be happier employees means happier residents. At least that's what we guide ourselves by. So I'm rooting for it that this will remain because it's much more cost effective for everybody.
Thank you. I definitely agree with you. Matt, do you feel like there's any insurance liability if they want to have the in-person meetings?
Well, it's likely excluded on the general liability. The liability doesn't go away because the liability is still there, even though it may not be covered. Again, if communities are, as long as they're not being stupid, I think it's a hard sell, and this is more of a legal opinion, which I'm not exactly qualified to give, but it's a harder sell to say that the community is truly liable for it. Some communities have purchased the legal defense policy as maybe a stopgap, and There's some debate as to how useful it'll actually be, because you have to be denied by your directors and officers, you have to be denied by your general liability, and then this provides defense costs only, and there are costs that could be associated with a claim that even this policy still doesn't pick up. So it's important to know exactly what you're buying. Again, if you have a clubhouse that holds 20 people, but you need to get 300 residents in there, in person doesn't make sense because you can't comply with what the CDC says you have to do. If you're outdoors and you're around the pool, and I've done, around the pool meetings recently where people can space out and people have masks, and, everybody, those who are comfortable doing it. And I like Raphael's comment is, if you do it online right now, you're able to include more of the community, which is usually a good thing. So, but if you want to do in person, just don't do anything stupid. Do your attorney a favor.
We actually have a couple of questions coming in. I knew this was going to be a pretty hot topic. What is the counties, pretty much Palm Beach and Broward and Dade, have they changed their restrictions on social distancing? What are the rules for that, Paula?
Well, since the order, I think it was a July or June order that was opening the facilities back up. Since that point in time, they've been reduced. It's mask wearing, it's social distancing, and following the CDC guidelines. Aaron spoke to a couple different things. If you're going to use your facilities, you're going to make sure that you follow the CDC guidelines. You're going to assure that you have maintained a practice of keeping a record of how you're cleaning, how you're swiping, how you're wiping, and that you have the check-ins, things like that. So the county has not imposed any additional restrictions. There is the mask for Palm Beach County, the mask for the other counties as well, and just following the social distancing with respect to spacing of individuals who are not in a family group.
Great. And this is on the question and answer too, Paula. As we go forward this year, can the association require proof of vaccination as we get further into this?
I don't believe the association can require proof of vaccination on a legal basis to enter the common area facilities. You have a use right to those common area facilities, and imposing additional restrictions other than what the CDC has recommended would be inappropriate. First of all, it would be asking for someone's individual health information, which is also against the law. And then you would have to, even if an individual wanted to voluntarily comply, now you have someone's individual health information, you've imposed an additional duty on the association, which didn't exist before. So we always want to avoid imposing additional duties that do not already exist for an association. That question comes up from time to time. You can still, I believe, have the assumption of risk that the association can require an owner to sign or a guest to sign before they participate in certain recreational facilities or activities. I think that is still appropriate. But again, I don't know how that's going to play out in a court of law. Speaking to the liability, and Matt mentioned earlier, causation, very early on, it was my opinion. I know some attorneys that attend these webinars, I got a couple emails saying I strongly disagree with you, but I think the causation is key here. Someone's going to have a very difficult time proving causation that they got the virus from using the rec facility or using the pool or using the association or attending association meeting, because unless that person has a very specific limited scope of facts with respect to they haven't been out, that's even difficult because individuals have received the COVID from having groceries delivered. So I think causation is huge here. And again, I mentioned it in March or April of last year that I don't see a lot of our friendly personal injury attorneys that we see on the back of the buses. I think we would have already seen many, many, many claims filed and lawsuits filed. Absent the
It's all
nursing.
those exclusions. Matt said that.
That's a good point, because Matt mentioned his claim where someone was tying their shoes. So unfortunately, in our world, the insurance pays when it makes a good business judgment to pay, as opposed to litigating and paying attorneys. So you do have the situation where someone falls over their own shoelaces and sues the association. And the best practice for our insurance carriers is to pay a small amount as a nuisance claim. And I don't see that happening with COVID. I just don't see that the personal injury attorneys are going to be able to start filing suits and putting the carriers in a corner with respect to payouts.
The point there is if there's absolute exclusions from the get-go,
Right.
There's no pot of gold to chase at the end of the rainbow.
Right.
So
There's no pockets. There's no pockets around the table. So Sue
It's
often and
worth it.
sue all the pockets you can sue is what the, personal injury, attorney's going to do. So if you don't have any pockets, then we're not going to see a lot of claims.
The counter is you could go after the association who has the power of assessment, but I think if attorneys started doing a practice like that, that's going to quickly get the attention of Tallahassee and put some legislation and possibly that could deter that type of behavior too. So
That's a good mention because the bill last year was the relief bill was supposed to include those exceptions, and that didn't make it through the bill.
right.
Yeah, that's right.
Aaron, we had a good question come up for you since people are thinking of reopening clubhouses for these type things. What HVAC and indoor air quality enhancements should be made prior to doing that?
That's a great question. So there's actually a couple recommendations by the CDC, and it starts with best practices, making sure that you're properly cleaning out your HVAC systems, that your rooms are properly ventilated. A lot of times I see in our older properties and our older buildings that we are not properly ventilated. And that can be something as simple as not having ducting going down the center of your indoor hallways if you're in a condo building. HEPA filtration is the best filters that you can have. We recommend using better products like those HEPA air filters in all of your HVACs to help filter those particulates out of the air. We do recommend that if it's a nice day out, that you are getting that fresh air inside of your indoor air spaces in the correct way. If it's 82 degrees and 100% humidity, I'm not saying that because you can create mold, but what I am saying, if it's 60 degrees out and you can open up your windows for a few hours to air out your space, that's a great way to get that fresh air. And we know that the COVID virus is less transmitted when you're outdoor as opposed to a contained indoor space. There's also other few things that you can do. There's ultraviolet lights that can be installed into your individual HVAC systems. And I can send everybody on this call or even type it into the chat box. The CDC has a whole portion of their website with HVAC upgrades that you can make. And I'll put that in there now for you guys.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm interested in that myself, just to have that information. Paula, can associations continue to delay or postpone their meetings?
Yeah, we touched upon this when we were talking about Zoom. So I do have examples, unfortunately, where they've postponed even last year's annual meeting and they're continuing to postpone the annual meetings. The answer is no. You really need to, first of all, follow your bylaws with respect to when the annual meeting should occur. And an association is going to have a difficult time trying to provide an excuse or make an excuse at this point in time with Zoom so readily available and user-friendly for your annual meetings. So all of your meetings need to be, again, properly noticed. Please don't postpone your annual meeting. Work with your property manager or your attorney to make sure that you have the ability to provide it via Zoom or in your parking lot. I attended a meeting just yesterday in a parking lot and had a great speaker system that they had set up for everybody to social distance. And we had a larger annual meeting than they had in the past. So that was interesting, but the answer is no, you should not be postponing your annual meeting. Also, a question that comes up from time to time are board meetings that haven't been properly noticed because of COVID. So don't use COVID as an excuse to not follow Florida statute with respect to properly noticed meetings and open meetings.
Yeah, and I will just add to that because I do election monitoring for a lot of association meetings. You can do everything where the owners actually have to pre-register, just like you did for this webinar today, so that you have all the information of the owner, the email address. You can compare that prior to the start of the meeting so that, can really be held by Zoom and you can obtain your quorum for that. For the counting of ballots, our law firm here, we've done a number of meetings here in the office. We have all the materials shipped to our office so that if you don't want, anybody from the property to be exposed to anybody else, or you don't want your management staff counting the ballots, we've done that here. We'll put cameras right on the actual counting and the owners can sit on Zoom and watch the ballot counting. So there's so many ways to have the meetings. There's just really no excuse not to have it at this point. And, if you need any help with that, you can always reach out to me. I am a state certified election monitor. I do stuff for the ombudsman's office as well. And we do a number of meetings here at the firm and even at the properties, go to the properties, everything's via Zoom. So if we can help in any way, please let me know. So meetings, definitely a hot topic, but now right around the corner is hurricane season, So knocking on our door come June, we'll have that. So Erin, as we're heading into hurricane season, what do you recommend in addition to our normal prep because we're in a pandemic?
I think that this time, what COVID has really taught us is that we need to prepare a little bit better for things in advance. So think about what are your risks, your biggest risks on your property. If you are a condo, HOA, co-op, where do you stand with your landscape contract for post-storm response? You have to have these contracts in place so you're better prepared moving forward. So who are your big vendors? Should we get a Category 3 hurricane next week? Not God bless, but we want to make sure we have those in place. And that starts with your landscaping. How are you going to access your property post-storm? Once you get to your physical building itself, what are your biggest risks? Making sure your generator works. Who's servicing your generator should that go down post-storm? Who's servicing your roof post-storm? Your electrician, your plumber, your restoration contractor. You need to make sure that you have these key players to get you back up and running prior to hurricane season starting. You also need to make sure that you have your supply list in check now before hurricane season starts. Every hurricane season, I see prices of plywood go up by at least 100% as soon as June 1 hits. So making sure that we have these things beforehand to be successful. And that could even be going down to making sure that you have all of the spring ties for your hurricane shutters, should you need to put those up. Making sure you have a plan in place for those things is really important. And then making sure you have a plan in place for your team. A communication plan internally is so key in being successful in hurricane season, from preparation to pre-storm, getting your property ready, to putting it back together once a storm does hit, and making sure that you also are caring with your staff and making sure that they have a plan for their own personal safety as well is key, because they need to have their own plan to make sure that they can get back to you and your property so you can execute your plan successfly.
Yeah, and I will say, having been here, being in the management side of the industry during 3, 4, 5 hurricanes, 04 and 05 being our worst years, and having some major damage up here in Palm Beach County, we never really thought about personal protective equipment, sanitizer, those kind of things. We're all laughing when the toilet paper sold out and there was none available. We said, we stock up for hurricanes. We buy 10 tons of water, gas, all this other stuff, and nobody ever hoarded the toilet paper. These are going to be real concerns. We got to make sure we have employees have sanitizer, wipes, masks, those type of things, because when you're in the middle of chaos with no power, that's the last thing you need to be worried about. Where is it or whatever? And, I would also suggest too, that your security staff, front desk, all that they're prepared with whatever they need, because those are things that,
is a water crash cart, we call it, and that can also double as your hurricane crash cart. So there's some basic tools that as a property you should have readily available to you, and that starts with, how do we deal with water on our property at a very basic level? Do we have a shop vac? Do we have carpet vans? Do we have 1 to 2 dehumidifiers to immediately start taking up the mess that we find when we get back there in a post-storm situation? So there are things that you can budget for now and have to use throughout the year to be successful, and not just in hurricane season. So you want to make sure you have that tools and keeping a checklist, so that way you don't have to reinvent the wheel every single year.
Right. And get your line of credit with Jane and your credit Popular Bank, and make sure that you have those tools available for the associations. I know she had touched on that before. Jane, did you want to add anything else about that? Because I know money is so important after a storm.
It is. And cash is important. Cash is king after a storm. So obviously a revolving line of credit is going to provide that source of cash to you. And many of the larger contractors will not service your property if you don't have a line of credit. That's becoming a whole lot more popular. So we highly recommend, and early. Don't wait till the last minute. We certainly recommend that you seek and get that process going now rather than tomorrow. And not only that, but a lot of associations are in the midst of a lot of large projects. Raphael referred to it, and Paula referred to it. So banks are still, Popular Association Bank is still lending for large projects that give you the opportunity to spread, that payment for your owners, spread it out over anything from 1 to 15 years to make cash flow and special assessments less injurious to your owners and less of a debt. So thank you.
Yeah, awesome. Great. So, and we will be having another class coming up in the next few months on the hurricanes, because there's a whole lot more to discuss. We just briefly touched on that because it's another thing to add to our plate while we're dealing with this pandemic. So we do have some questions from owners that have been coming in, and we'll take, open questions and answers now. First, Paula, can association boards limit entry of guests to apartments or the building or?
Yes, reasonable rules. Again, we still are going to rely upon the fact that we have a state of emergency that's been declared. So creating reasonable rules and regulations, including limiting guests from the recreational areas or the facilities, the pool, it is appropriate. And we think that so should someone challenge it, you may contact your attorney to determine how effective that challenge may or may not be given the specific circumstances. But we do advise our clients that drafting the reasonable rules with respect to limitations can be done. And again, make sure that you are calling a board meeting, appropriate notice, proper notice, and in your minutes, it's going to reflect that it was a board vote. We don't want our board members, individual board members, I can give a couple of examples that created more controversy than necessary because the limitations and the rules were not promulgated at a board meeting. So please make sure that when you want to create those rules or provide those limitations on use of the rec facilities, that it is at a properly noticed board meeting and not just the one board member who is limiting these people, individuals or guests.
Awesome, thank you. This is kind of, I think for Raphael and Paula, our HOA is a bit old school, not up to speed on the statutes and not too concerned with things that could cause lawsuits. How can I get their attention and make them more aware of, how to be vigilant of these things? They already have one claim for a fall in one of the many potholes.
Run up to a board member's door and bang on his door. No, I'm kidding.
That's what I was gonna say.
The reality is that at the end of the day, it's very difficult for us to change anything that anybody does. That's at least a management side. That's not our role. Our role is to really try to educate. So if that resident is providing that complaint, is forwarding that complaint to the board of directors, ultimately, if the board's ignoring it and it is a valid complaint, we would welcome that resident to come to a board meeting. Obviously, things have changed now with Zoom, but putting that board member on notice, at least sending a notice and just advising them. I'm all about tact, right? So if you're upset about something, don't come in with this very aggressive approach. I think you come in with very strategic and saying, look, I know you're busy probably with COVID and everything that you have going on, but I'm very concerned with X, Y, Z. And just make sure you're sending it via email. That way it can count as official record if they say they received it. If not, mail it in. But either way, just go to a board meeting, advise them. And if you see no traction, then that's the beauty of democracy. You have the ability to run for the board the next year. And before you know it, it's already election. So start campaigning. And again, because I think it's better to do things with tact, is take a very positive approach that, there's change needed or whatever it may be. There's concerns that you have. Get your group together and just start campaigning.
I agree.
That, and I want to just mention, if you are a condominium owner, you have additional available remedies that really are not available to a homeowners association owner. And those are utilizing your division complaints, for appropriate complaints, not to harass your association by filing 4 or 5 a year. We see that from time to time, but you do have the ability to file on a complaint form from the division. You also have the ability to send in a question with respect to whatever topic is affecting you or you think is affecting the association. Certified mail, and the association, a condominium association, statutorily has to respond to that particular certified mail inquiry.
One other thing that I've seen work really well, and I actually partnered with one of Raphael's regional directors this past year, is to be holding town hall meetings on concerns that the association has and bringing in your industry experts and your industry partners to support you. Like we did one for one of Raphael's properties in Fort Lauderdale, because they had chronic water issues that were unit owner responsibilities throughout the community. They had 10 water heaters that went in 1 year. So we did an educational class for the entire community, and everybody really got behind being more proactive. So I think really when you're giving people the why behind why we do something, gets them to be a lot more involved and invested in their community, and you can see a lot more change that way.
Right. I definitely agree with that. And now with Zoom and having panels, town halls are easier and you can get those experts to be at your meeting easier.
Right.
Paula, can guests be required to provide a COVID negative test?
Again, no, I don't think the association, for a couple different reasons, can require, if you're allowing guests to use your facilities, which absent COVID and the state of emergency, that would be a requirement. The guests are entitled to use with their owners, the facilities. And I don't believe that you can provide or state that they have to give the association a COVID negative test. And again, then you're creating an additional duty. You're creating something to where the guest comes and your staff failed to obtain that negative test, and lo and behold, that particular person has COVID the next day. So you don't want to create additional duties that you don't already legally, statutorily, or in your governing documents have as an association.
Agreed. This is kind of for Matt and for Paula. I hear that insurance costs are increasing because of the amount of money that we're paying to attorneys' fees, that they were paying more to attorneys than to the claimant. Matt, what's your take on that?
So I mentioned that there's a lot of different reasons. It's not just one particular cause for the increases, and perhaps why it's so dramatic right now is because they're getting hit from many angles. It's not just the increased amount of claims that they've had. It's, not just how many storms that there've been. One of the things that the company, when they're sitting down to justify their rate increases, that they are using to justify it is they are paying additional amounts to attorneys. So the way I understand it is their state of Florida very rarely awards prevailing party fees, at least in regards to insurance claims. So there's no deterrent for an attorney to take a case and pursue perhaps even a silly claim against an insurance company for, maybe a roof that, I've seen certain instances where an attorney comes in paired with a public adjuster and they say that we can't perfectly match the roof piles, so therefore you have to pay for the whole cost, the cost of the whole roof. And so they're able to keep pursuing this because the attorney's doing it for free and they only get paid if they win. And so the insurance company still incurs all these defense costs, and even if they win it, they're not going to get those defense costs paid back. So that's one side of the argument that I've heard. The other side is that at the end of the claim, the state of Florida is, to my knowledge, the only state that allows and regularly allows multipliers paid out to the attorneys at the end of the claim, where they can get 1.7, 2, 3 times their normal rate applied from the insurance company. And there's a growing sense of anti-corporationism, if that's a word or the right word, where attorneys are smart. They know if they get to court and sit in front of a jury that nobody really likes the insurance company, and it's the big bad insurance company versus the claimant, and those juries are disproportionately siding with the jury. So there's a lot of different phenomena here that are bringing these cases forward, maybe in a higher volume certainly in a higher volume than we've seen, maybe more so than we should see. I do believe that public adjusters are necessary for certain claims when the insurance company hasn't been given the opportunity to do the right thing. There's a lot of pieces in this, and I can kind of touch on the surface of it. It's a growing trend that the insurance companies, and still a minority of claims, but it's growing, where insurance companies are being notified of a loss, but the notice of suit is the first notice of loss. The insurance company was never given a claim by the insured saying, I have roof damage, I want my roof replaced. And once you have a litigated claim, I've read that litigated claims are 500% more expensive than non-litigated claims. So it's why I'm always a big proponent of at least give the insurance company the opportunity to handle the claim the right way. Because let's say you have $1 million claim and the adjuster comes in and from the insurance company says, I'll give you 500. You'll hire a public adjuster, you're only paying them on the additional 500 and not negotiate, rather than the 500 you would have, the full million or the 500 of that million that you would have gotten had you started with the insurance company there. And so I always want to make sure I'm clear. There are cases where public adjusters are necessary, but you'd have to argue with me for a minute to say from the get-go. So again, there's a lot of pieces to that, and the attorneys, Paula can probably speak to this more so.
Mhm.
There's certain, it's not even all attorneys. There's a certain group of attorneys who are really pursuing these
Say that again.
the same way that they're, and that's more so speaking to property, and I can focus on liability, where when I have some of these just egregious bodily injury claims or countersuits to boards, there's a couple of particular firms that I see more often than not are representing some of these claims against associations. So I'm not here to demonize all attorneys, but I'll finish with this. As I read recently that it's been tracked that there have been some claims where up to 71% of the claim amount has actually gone to the attorney. And that's based on not just the fees they have, but the multiplier at the end and them taking a higher portion of the claim. If all of the claim went to the insured, I'd have much less of an issue with that, but attorneys have to be paid too. So long answer, complex answer. I can only kind of touch the surface on it all, but let me know if you have anything else you want to throw into that, Paula.
I think that's a good point. Your response, it's a very complex issue when we're talking about attorneys' fees, and it's decades old. This is nothing new with respect to how the structure of the litigation looks, how the insurance comes in, and there are two pending bills, both in the Senate and the House, that attempts to limit the payout for attorneys' fees related to insurance claims. However, I can tell you that even in law school, this was a big topic that we always discussed, and that's legislation state by state trying to limit not only insurance attorneys payouts for the liability that we're discussing with respect to associations, but it's also come up in medical malpractice, et cetera, where the claimant is actually being jeopardized or is jeopardized with respect to his or her own claim, whatever that may be, because the attorney's fees take up most of that particular payout. And you're right, Matt, we do have in Florida where you can multiply the attorney's fees as well with respect to certain different types of claims. So it is a huge problem, and to scratch the surface of it is to say the least, because we could discuss this for hours and hours with respect to how it works and attorney's fees. And I wouldn't want to call anyone less of an attorney for what they're practicing in, but it is very advantageous to pick up these types of claims, whether it's with respect to the liability or with respect to, like you mentioned, Matt, really egregious bodily injury issues. My opinion is it's not going to change anytime soon. And even though we have two pending bills, I seriously doubt they make it through, because this has been going on for decades, and there's been legislation that has been drafted over and over again, which never makes it through the legislature.
It's always a tough topic, litigation with insurance claims and things like that. So on a lighter note, Jane, is it normal and customary for people to be charged annually for lines of credit?
Yes, there's usually a renewal fee for lines of credit. That can vary depending on the banking relationship that you have, and a number of other situations that are, that would be client specific or association specific. But yes, there's usually an annual renewal fee on lines of credit.
Right, thank you. Paula, town hall meetings, do they need to be treated as board meetings? Do they have to be posted and noticed in the
I always
same
love
way?
this question, because I also love the question, it's only a workshop, so we didn't notice. So sometimes I just say, please don't tell me that. I didn't just hear that. My advice that all meetings of the board, which constitute a quorum, need to be properly noticed. And that will include your town hall meeting, which is described as a board meeting, but it's not going to have a specific agenda, and you're just going to take questions and answers from individual members on any topic, or maybe you've narrowed the topic, but the answer is yes, they do need to be properly noticed.
Great, thank you. And what would you advise boards? How do you advise boards who refuse to advise the owners when another resident has tested positive?
The association, again, is not under any obligation or duty, we're going to call it a duty, to advise any other member with respect to, even if they receive information. So I didn't touch upon that earlier. There's no obligation to advise other owners currently with respect to a person being infected with COVID. You do want to take the necessary steps. You've already covered this with respect to showing or having proof that you have done all of the necessary due diligence steps, cleaning, et cetera, when you do learn of a COVID infected member who's used your common areas or lobbies, et cetera. But the association is under no obligation to share that information, even if a board member or a staff member has received positive communication from an owner that they have tested positive.
Awesome. Thank you, Paula. Aaron, how would you suggest outdoor touch surfaces be handled? Call boxes, gate knobs, etc.
I think that that's really specific per association. Again, it depends on how frequently those are touched per the CDC's new guidelines, which again, I can send to you in an email after this with their recommendations as far as those are. It really depends on frequency. If you have a call box that everybody uses to get into your neighborhood and it's being used all the time, that's something that we'd want to address specifically for your association. If we're dealing with doorknobs and handles on the backside of your building that nobody uses, do those really need to be cleaned that often? No. So it would be definitely community specific. And part of what we do as regional account managers, and most of us do on this call, is we develop these specific protocols for your association. So if you want help with that, we'd be more than happy to come and do a risk assessment for your building and give you best practices and advice on your specific property. But it would definitely be specific.
Great, thank you. And that wraps up our Q&A. We're coming to the end of our time. It's almost 11:30. I do see there's a couple more questions, but we got through most of all of our questions. Thank you all for attending today. We really enjoyed having you, and thanks to all of our great panelists. This is normally where we'd clap when we're in person, so clap at your desk. And we will keep you posted for more webinars to come up on different topics and everything. So thank you all. Have a great day, and appreciate you joining us.
Thank you.
Safe
Pleasure.
and healthy.
Thank you.
Every week.
Bye-bye. Thank you.